Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to talk about how the DUP and others may have boxed themselves into a bit of a corner, depending on the outcome of the Stormont elections today, I suppose, as the Westminster government announces that it's not actually all that keen on unilaterally scrapping the Northern Ireland Protocol after all. And so the on-again, off-again love affair between the DUP and their slightly less insane cousins in the Tory party is off again. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, I discussed recently the plans for Boris Johnson's government to propose legislation that would allow ministers to unilaterally drop bits of the Northern Ireland Protocol that they don't like. It would still be a breach of international law, of course, but it would be lawful in the UK. The government don't seem that bothered about international law because global justice in matters like this is very, very slow. But a British court could very quickly reverse any ministerial decision to tamper with our legal obligations regarding the protocol, as the DUP discovered recently themselves when they tried to do just that. So I imagine they were delighted when the government proposed this legislation. That'll stop British courts interfering. Now, I did say at the time I wasn't sure it could ever actually materialise because the House of Lords could easily block it on the basis that it breaks international law. In fact, never mind the Lords, even the House of Commons might just find enough Tory MPs who, although they have to support Brexit, do not have to support breaking the law and so might block it at the first step. And even if the legislation were passed, there would be consequences for using it. Both the US and the EU have been clear about their opposition to such a move, and the EU have heavily implied that it could cost Johnson the entire trade and cooperation agreement. In fact, there are so many things ranged against this proposal that under normal circumstances, you couldn't really understand how an entire political party could ever believe that it would work out the way they think. But then you remember this is the same DUP who thought that Brexit would be more likely to see a hard border inside Ireland than a trade border between Northern Ireland and Britain. And then you remember that they think the Earth is like a few thousand years old and that dinosaurs were never a thing. At that point, I suppose it makes sense that they aren't good predictors of political trajectories. They don't anchor their decision making onto reality. So it'll be presumably have come as something of a shock, yet again, to see that the UK government has decided against imposing even more economic sanctions on itself via the vehicle of breaking the withdrawal agreement. Brandon Lewis, the Northern Ireland Secretary, has reportedly said that the government look like they're pulling plans to have the protocol wrecking legislation included in this Queen's speech next week. Now, the Queen's speech, for those who don't know, is how the government announces its main legislative agenda for the following session of Parliament. So all their high priority stuff goes in there. So although the government aren't ruling out the legislation at some point, meaning that both the US and the EU will continue to mistrust our government, they aren't making it a priority. In other words, it probably won't happen at all, but it certainly won't be happening anytime soon. Perhaps the DUP imagined that a bill would be presented to Parliament in a couple of weeks and it'd all be done and dusted and all legal sometime in June, and then by the end of June they'd be dismantling the protocol. Fantasies. But very angry fantasies. The DUP will be very unhappy for a couple of reasons, I imagine. First, they don't get their unicorn. Second, the announcement coming just before the polls open for Stormont elections will have massively wrong-footed them. Various pro-DUP commentators are not best pleased with Brandon Lewis. Several of them have suggested that if the UK government doesn't change its position back, then they will face no executive in Stormont after the elections. This refers to the threat from the DUP that they will not take their assembly seats unless they get their unicorn. Also, jelly and ice cream. Oh, and God help us if the ice cream doesn't come out of a unicorn's arse. The DUP also made the same threat if Sinn Féin became the largest party in Stormont. A little bit pointless, as there's no real difference between the position of First Minister and Deputy First Minister. It's the same powers. But here's the thing. So let's say the DUP still end up being the largest party in Stormont after all. Or let's say that they're second, but they decide to get over it and take their seats anyway, as long as the Tories play ball on the protocol, that is. So then let's say that the legislation isn't announced in the Queen's speech next week. What then? What do the DUP do? Do they refuse to take their seats and collapse the Assembly? Well, what then? That'll show the Tories, they'll say, will it? They will be collapsing Stormont because they do not like Brandon Lewis and what the Conservative Party are doing at the moment, or failing to do, however you want to look at it. But what is the consequence of Stormont collapsing? Well, Brandon Lewis takes over executive control as Northern Ireland Secretary. The Conservatives in general decide Northern Irish matters. What sort of threat is that? I don't like you, so I'm going to make you my boss. That is the stupidest act of revenge I've ever heard of. Because of their dissatisfaction with the Tories, their plan is to give the Tories control over their own legislative body. Is it any wonder this party is the subject of so much ridicule? Although I have to say, it was the TUV, which is another anti-reality unionist party, that had the most to say about this as far as I could tell from reports. They said that the government's comment should focus people in Northern Ireland to go out and vote for anti-protocol parties. I mean, they were mostly meant their own party. Now, let's say this howling at the moon worked and a crap load of people voted for the DUP and the TUV. What exactly does that achieve? Send a message to Westminster? What message? That people don't like the protocol? I mean, two things. First of all, Northern Irish businesses do not want the protocol scrapping. They want it refining, but not removing. And as it's largely businesses that are impacted by the protocol, that would suggest there's no practical argument for unilaterally scrapping it at all. And the second thing is, let us just say that a clear majority of Northern Ireland were against the protocol, which they're not. But let's say you could twist the Stormont results to claim it is. What difference does that make? A clear majority of Northern Ireland were undeniably against Brexit. They still had to go through with it though, didn't they? And since when did the Conservatives govern for what the majority want? The majority want the government to tax large corporations to help them with the cost of living. Not happening. The majority want the government to properly resource the NHS. Not happening. The majority want Boris Johnson to resign. That might happen. The majority don't want us demonising refugees. You can bet that's happening. This government doesn't give a shit about what people want. So even if the Stormont results, against all reason, returned more votes for anti-protocol parties than ones who accept it, the Conservatives wouldn't care. And if the Conservatives wouldn't dismantle the protocol, what then? Get Stormont to do it? They can't. The High Court in Belfast already stopped that nonsense when Poots tried it. Collapse the Assembly? Already talked about that. It means putting the Tories in charge, the people they're complaining about. They've basically got this fantasy and nowhere to go with it. Completely boxed into a corner. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. Maybe even click on the join button if you'd be interested in membership. And until next time, I'll see you later.